Hey there everyone, before I get stuck into this video I just want to quickly say RIP Mitch Lucker. Unfortunately the frontman of Suicide Silence passed away earlier today in a motorcycle accident, and this really does suck for a couple of different reasons. Firstly, he has a wife and child. Secondly, despite the fact I didn't like Suicide Silence's music, he was a brilliant vocalist and a great frontman as well. I actually got to see them live at Download in 2010. Also, lastly, he seemed like a really cool, down-to-earth guy, and him and his band did one of the most awesome things I've seen been done by a band, really. And I'll leave a link below so you can check it out. It's actually a video. But anyway, on to the review. Today I'm going to be reviewing the latest from Australia's biggest metalcore outfit, Parkway Drive. The album Atlas is the band's fourth release since they formed in 2002. They are, like I said, a metalcore band, but they kind of sit on the heavier side of things, providing you aren't including the exceptions like Converge and Dillinger Escape Plan, who in my opinion are closer to mathcore if you want to get pedantic. But regardless, since the release of their debut album, Killing With A Smile, the band have only gotten more and more popular and have been on several tours with huge bands like Bring Me The Horizon. They've also been supported by huge bands like Devil Wears Prada, Your Demise, The Ghost Inside. The band's second release, Horizons, was, in my opinion, a much less bland and better written metalcore album. It had some really great, memorable melodies, as well as some really well-placed crushing riffs. It had a lot of pace variation and stuff like that. I will say I thought this album was a touch hit or miss. Tracks like Carrion, Boneyards, Horizons, Dead Man's Chest and Idols and Anchors were great, but I must admit I felt like a lot of it was just kind of filler. I really started getting into this band after their third release, Deep Blue. For me, this was a much more consistent, darker, detailed record than the previous two. There was a nice story to it as well, nothing mind-blowing, but it certainly added to the album. It also had a really nice production quality, and despite the fact that it didn't reinvent the wheel, it was certainly head and shoulders above other metalcore releases. So anyway, now we have Atlas, the fourth studio album from Parkway Drive. The album opens really nicely with the track Sparks. Admittedly, it's nothing necessarily too original, but it does sound really nice. There's some really nice layers being applied on top of the acoustic guitar that's playing a nice riff underneath. Eventually a drum roll kicks in, and some strings also swoop into the mix every now and again. There is even some spoken word in the background. Once it kicks in, it doesn't really explode in the way I'd expect. And at first, I actually thought the production left it sounding a bit flat, but as I gave it a couple of different listens, it did grow on me, and it had enough variation. It kind of created a subtle atmosphere, and it was a very nice intro to the record as well. I will say though, despite the fact I liked the intro, the next two tracks didn't really impress. It was very much standard Parkway Drive riffing. Transitions into breakdowns were a touch boring. It was very standard chuggy breakdowns as well, which I will say is actually unusual for this band. They normally keep breakdowns interesting by mixing the patterns up, placing melodies over them, and just filling it with drum fills and stuff like that to really give it a mix of things. However, these two tracks were both a little bit one-paced and nothing too spectacular, I must say. Also, like I said, some of the breakdowns on these two tracks were just kind of momentumless and dull. The next track, Wild Eyes, certainly was a bit of a improvement on the previous two tracks. The track opens with a very catchy and memorable melody backed by some gang vocals chanted. It then kicks into a breakdown and the melody is changed up a touch. The melody keeps it interesting, but the actual breakdown is kind of dull. Straight after this, the song picks it straight back up with some D beats, blast beats, tons of riffage that really fill the gaps, and for the first time this record actually sounds pretty pummeling and heavy. Around halfway the track goes into halftime and a solo comes in. It's layered upon and built upon really nicely with Winston's beastly vocals really complementing it. The pace picks up again, and at the end the gang vocals and that intro melody come back in before a final breakdown. This one actually has a really nice chord progression and is again built upon nicely. The song ends nicely with some drum fills underneath the chantings as well. I will say though, despite the fact the previous track was decent, it wasn't Deep Blue or even really good Horizon level for me. The next track, Dark Days, which was also the single, is where it really picks up for me. It opens with a very eerie bell sound, and it has this really dark, slow riff that is built upon with drums, and the breakdown that comes in straight afterwards I thought initially was actually pretty weak, but after more listens it's very dark and eerie. I don't think his intention was to be necessarily overly heavy or anything like that. As the song progresses through riffs, there are some kind of odd gang vocal moments that sort of go hey, hey kind of thing, and it's a little bit cheesy, but it's passable. The chorus of the song is actually a breakdown, and it's the first one on the album that really sounds like it has any bite, and it's the first one that really has that level that I know Parkway Drive are capable of. I will say the song is somewhat formulaic, it just sort of goes verse, chorus. However, it's not poorly written, and each part is built upon nicely, so it doesn't necessarily bore you. During the second chorus, there's a great guitar solo that fits in really freaking nicely. The last minute is basically a build, then a final breakdown, and it's just got so much bite to it and aggression. It just sounds great. They mix it up with different patterns and also these wailing pinch harmonics, some kick-ass drumming as well. After this, I actually kind of feel like the album slows down a bit. A lot more of the tracks are kind of more mid-paced. The next track, The River, is a great example of this. It opens with these very clean, calming guitars and a clean vocal that kind of complements that. I really like the texture of the guitar at this point actually. Once the song kicks in, it maintains a very similar quality to that guitar in the fact that it's very clean. It kind of reminds me of Home is for the Heartless. I will say the band on this song sound a lot better than the previous material on this album, with the exception of Dark Days, and this was kind of the turning point for the album for me. The next track I want to talk about, Atlas, opens with a snare drum and a bass pattern that eventually comes in with some very twangy, clean guitars. And it actually has a really nice texture and sounds really great. The vocals eventually come in, the drums die out, the guitar texture changes, and it's all very atmospheric and nice. It was just a nice intro. However, for the most part of the song, it's still very much mid-paced riffing, Home is for the Heartless, that sort of thing. Which is actually, I must say, one thing that I kind of had a problem with on this album. For a lot of it, especially some of the good stuff, it was a bit too mid-paced and one-paced as well. It didn't really change. Like, one of the reasons I loved Deep Blue was because it was constantly changing. There was no real repetition in the songs, or at least not too much anyway. There was enough mix and variation to really keep it interesting. And this album, although it has that to a certain degree, it's not quite at the level of detail that was on the previous album, which I really kind of miss, I must admit. While I'm kind of having a moan, actually, my other major gripe with this album is the production. It's nowhere near as good as Deep Blue. It just doesn't have as much kick to it. I feel like it's a little bit muddy. It's not necessarily poor, it's just, I know they've had better produced records in the past. Both Horizons and Deep Blue were much better produced, which is in my opinion really unfortunate. But what can you do? The whole song closes on the songs Snake Oil and Holy Water. Now, this closes the album in a very similar way to Set to Destroy. It's a 2 to 3 minute song that's pretty pacey and flies through riff after riff after riff. And I must admit, I was looking forward to hearing this because I really enjoyed Set to Destroy. But the production on this track kinda leaves one of the main riffs that's repeated throughout the song flat. And it kinda has no real kick or aggression to it. It just ends up feeling really flat and kinda dull. I do think this song's kind of saved to a degree by a really decent melody that comes in, which is again something the Parkway are just great at in general. And also some great drumming using blast beats and double bass drumming really kind of helps this song a lot, especially after the 1.5 minute mark. On the whole, I felt like this album was a decent effort, but there was nothing really that memorable about it, bar a few songs. They really haven't changed at all, which I don't like. They have not experimented or gone any further with this band on this record. It's just another fairly dark metalcore record with some decent breakdowns, some catchy melodies and stuff like that. It's not as good as Deep Blue, and it's not as good as the good stuff in Horizons, for me anyway. Having said that, I do not think this is a bad album by any means. It's still an album full of decent metalcore material that is better than most metalcore you'll hear in this style of metalcore, but it just unfortunately didn't do much for me, so I'm going to give this album 5.5 to a 6 out of 10. However, like I said, if you're a Parkway Drive fan, if you're a fan of this particular style of music, you'll probably really enjoy this record, and I definitely recommend you check it out. Anyway, that's everything from me. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like, comment and subscribe, and I'll catch you guys and gals later.